Episode 6, Take 1.
How totally different did the world appear to medieval man? For him the earth was eternally fixed and at rest in the center of the universe. Men were all children of God under the loving care of the Most High, who prepared them for eternal blessedness, and all knew exactly what they should do and how they should conduct themselves in order to rise from a corruptible world to an incorruptible and joyous existence. Such a life no longer seems real to us, even in our dreams. Episode 6 is a political episode in which we mostly talk about the kind of chaotic political landscape in which we find ourselves for the last few years and probably for the next few years in the West, particularly the US. We kind of wanted to start with this quote because when we talk about politics, we always like to emphasize how it's mostly just a large-scale representation, let's say, of the culture and the society and the voting populace's internal collective psyche. This is a quote by Carl Jung from his book, The Spiritual Problem of the Modern Man. It was written in 1928, but we think it was really prescient and it really stands true today. He wrote a lot of really cool psychological and philosophical and therefore political related stuff about people, how they change, how they're changing in the modern world and their spiritual problems and how those kind of manifest.
And what brought us to this episode today was the 2020 elections and kind of reflecting back on 2020 US elections. And we were reflecting back on the 2016 elections, looking how we've changed and how maybe people have changed, just that discussion.
Especially that guy.
Yes,
Trump.
The 45th president.
45th president of the United States, Donald J. Trump, who's kind of the circus ringleader of all this chaos, let's say.
Yes, and somebody like that doesn't get elected out of nowhere.
No.
It's not like it's just one person in the population that is feeling these things. It's the majority of people there's something wrong.
There's something going on. Anyway,
something deep down.
And today we're going to be unpacking that. We're going to talk about our own experiences and our own growth under the thumb of such a chaotic world.
Yeah, so
growing up in it.
In 2016. How old were we?
We were 16.
Yes.
In 2020, we're going to be 21. Wait, no, we were 17 when Trump was elected.
Yeah, October.
November he was elected.
November, yeah, you know.
November 9th. D-Day. And we'll be 2021 when hopefully he is pushed off his throne and someone else is elected in the US.
Yes.
So we were pretty young. We're still going to be pretty young, but I think we were so new to politics.
It was really my first exposure.
Or the first time we cared about it, let's say.
Yeah.
Because for once there was something extreme and it felt like there was something at stake. And it got a lot of young people interested. So do you want to talk about your experience in that 2016 election, Alicia?
So it was 2015 when they were doing the run for the head of the party, so the Republican candidacy. Yes. And so at that point, the only exposure I had had to American politics was in 2008. We watched when Obama was
inducted?
The induction of Obama as
historical
president.
Moment.
So that was the only other exposure, and that was a really triumphant moment for humans. Like, it was really exciting.
It was a big thing.
And so I was 8, and then 8 years passed, and now it's like, cool, this guy did a lot of good. And then the fact that Trump was running for president.
Well, what did you think about him? You know, he was running the first big... Have you seen the clip where when he first announced his run for presidency? He's coming down the escalator, everyone's waiting for him. And then he gets on the stage and he makes this statements about how Mexicans, they're coming in, all this stuff. And people are like, wow, this is outrageous. This guy's never going to get elected.
Everyone just thought it was a joke.
Everyone thought this guy's, that's rock bottom. Like, no one talking like that will ever be elected, let's say.
No, and it was just, no one's going to be dumb enough to vote somebody with no political experience into office, is what we thought. Is what I think a lot of people thought when they were giving him coverage, which is probably, as we saw, we would watch the news and everything would be about him.
Everything was about Trump.
But it was just making fun of him, but he was getting the most coverage by 70%.
Well, who were the other Republican candidates?
I don't know.
You know Jeb?
Oh yeah, Jeb.
Jeb Bush with an exclamation point. But he was just kind of, I think he styled himself as Jeb because he knew that no one was going to vote for another Bush.
Yeah, no one wanted. Oh my.
But it turns out no one wanted to vote for a Jeb either. I think Ted Cruz was involved. There were a few others, but when you look back on them, it's like by far just the most dominant personality won. the loudest.
And I feel like everyone else that was running had some kind of a negative political event tied to their
because they had a history.
Name, tied to their...
Of course. Yeah. Trump having no political history was a big plus for him.
Yeah, because even though he had a history...
Of other sorts,
which in my mind would be way worse than history of politics or even your family.
Right.
But no, because he had no political history, I think that gave him a really big advantage in winning the head of that party, becoming the head of that party. And then his opposition... I was really excited because I was like, cool, a woman is running, Hillary. And she got nominated as the head of the Democrats.
Well, we were following that kind of run.
Yes.
We met each other during it.
Yeah.
And you met me as a big Bernie fan.
Yes, I did.
A huge fan of Bernie Sanders.
Yeah, because we were in Mexico.
Right.
And so it was just such a joke, even like amongst... the kids we were staying with.
Joking about Trump?
They're like, oh yeah, like he's such a joke. He wants to build a wall. And we were like, oh yeah,
this is crazy,
this is
man.
Insane. They're like,
You're like, but he's never going to win. Have you seen the polls?
Yeah. But then over the next year, things got a little more tense, but literally up until November 9th, I was like, there's literally no way. It's crazy that he won, but I mean, I see
why, exactly.
He was catering to this anti-immigration mindset, and he was... speaking the language of the people that wanted jobs and had been, I don't know.
Well, let's talk about Hillary. I think Trump's low-hanging fruit, but let's talk about the other side of that election. Well, let's talk about Bernie as well.
Okay.
Because Bernie comes through. He's an independent in Senate for years and years, which in itself is completely worthy of applause in such a partisan country as America and their politics. He comes through, albeit, he has to run as a Democrat or so he runs as a Democrat.
Yes.
The party is heavily leaning towards Clinton. She's an establishment political name. She's been there and back. Her husband's done it. She's done it. A lot of history. She's got a lot of money involved. A lot of old friends. And Bernie, and she's the most. Her platform is very inoffensive. It's very safe. It's basically centrist, maybe a little bit center left. That's about it.
Yeah.
Bernie comes through. He says, "Big money has to get out of politics." He says, "The wealth inequality in this country is out of control." He says, "The top 7 families own as much wealth as the bottom 70%." Or some. He kind of popularizes all these statistics, which everyone now, everyone on the street knows something. Can say something like that. He's got kind of a crowdsourced campaign.
He's never taken a donation over like $200 or something.
Yeah. He's a good speaker. He speaks forcefully, but to everyone. He's not exclusive. He's not trying to rile up any kind of negativity.
No.
He's trying to appeal to all sorts of people. He has a history of doing so. There's a story of him being arrested when he was marching in the civil rights movement, all that kind of stuff. And he does have a long political history, but it's pretty much all good stuff. He's always been on the right side of history.
Yes.
You'd say someone like that would be a great candidate.
That's what you would say, and that's what you would think. But...
it didn't happen.
He was too advanced. People weren't ready for the burn.
He's too ahead of his time, let's say.
He's too ahead of his time.
People just weren't ready to feel the burn en masse. The political machine that was the Clintons just kept on trucking right past him.
They did, and they won.
The nomination. And then
they were like, they had a brainstorming session. They sat down, they said, what's our campaign slogan going to be?
Right, yeah.
And then somebody at that boardroom.
Some genius, man.
Somebody sipping their kind of room temperature coffee.
Sipping their
raised
kombucha.
a hand.
Raised their hand.
And they said,
what about love trumps hate?
And then Hillary just shut her book.
Genius.
She said, genius.
She said, genius.
Print it.
Get it in the prints. She said, because our love trumps his hate. Unfortunately, there's another kind of reading, which is the first reading, which is
love Trump.
You got to love Trump and his hate. You got to love that man's hate.
Read that, and if part of the sign's obscured, it just says love Trump. So countries across America said vote Trump, love Trump.
Yeah.
Just depending on how you were looking at them.
That's why I wanted to talk about Hillary and the Democrats, because there could be essays and books written on Trump, and there definitely will be. But make no mistake,
how did you lose?
This was an election lost, not an election won. First, you elected probably one of the most
hated people.
one of the most disliked women in America, who had about 20 to 30 years of slander against her. We don't want to get into emails and, judging the legitimacy.
No, but I didn't even never looked into that, but I just knew.
It doesn't really matter when you come up with a candidate. You just need to think about what is their reputation. And her reputation was one of being corrupt, not for the people or nothing like that. And what do we know about that 2016 platform? Like, what was on her platform? I
never heard her talk about anything besides hating on Trump.
Right.
So if 90% of your airtime is talking about the other candidate.
Love Trump's hate. So he still dominates the conversation even when she's talking.
100%. Every single debate I watched.
Well, what do we remember from the debates? Because I remember it was pretty awful to watch.
It was.
There was a lot of Trump speaking over her.
Yes.
I remember the chants when he was saying, lock her up. There was witty comebacks when she said something. He'd be like, well, if you were in president, he said, if I was in president, you'd be in jail. I remember that.
Yeah.
Like all this.
And every time she would speak, she would just laugh.
Yeah, the problem with live debates is that if a candidate speaks in tweets, they're going to get the applause. And Trump kind of speaks in tweets and punchlines and quick little responses, and he speaks loudly, and he is good at coming up with double binds and conversational quick rhetoric, and he lies so much and all this stuff that can be hard to counter because it's rapid fire wrongness coming from him.
Yeah. So that's kind of the history behind that debate. Most people probably knew that, but this is what we were observing at the time, and we were seeing these things.
So first we were distraught that Bernie didn't get in.
Of course.
We were distraught. We say, okay, it's all right. At least there's Hillary. And then we just watched the polls as it grew closer to election day, evening out more and more and more until it was really close by November.
But as I was saying, even the night before, I think the sentiment that we were feeling that was there's no way that he's going to win.
It was kind of like Hillary's got to win.
Right? It was like Hillary's got to win. And I feel like that's probably why some people might have not even shown up to vote, because they were the people that would have pushed it over the edge, they were like, no, it's not even a debate. It's not even a question. She's got to win.
Yeah, there were a lot of leftists like that. Let's talk about those different kind of voting groups.
Yes.
So that maybe could have swayed it. So people talk about the Bernie bros, which maybe were so upset about Bernie not getting the election, about Hillary's supposed, it being rigged and all that stuff, that they actually flip sides and says, we got to vote for Trump instead. I don't think that was a sizable demographic.
No,
I think it's kind of overblown.
It was probably, but a couple hundred people.
But we have noted since the election, there was a lot of similarities between Trump and Bernie. They're kind of the good side and the bad side of the same coin, I think.
Yeah, just kind of saying we need extreme action to make change.
Yeah, they were both standing for big change. They were both saying, in some terms, we have to drain the swamp. Trump literally said that, and Bernie saying we've got to get all this big money and the lobbying out of politics and stuff. So they were both kind of against that elite vibe.
Yes.
It seemed a little bit more sincere and authentic to me from Bernie, because he's not a literal billionaire who always brags about his money. Whereas that coming from Trump, it sounds so rich when he's like, drain the swamp, these Hollywood elites. And it's like, you are rich and you just brag about being rich, and then you can pose yourself as the people's champion. But for some reason people believed him.
So, I mean, whatever people say is true,
anyway,
right?
So they were both talking about wealth inequality. I think that's about it. But those were probably the biggest things that got Trump in.
Yeah.
He stands for change for once. He's not a politician. He's not like all these other snake-tongued pretenders. He's actually going to make change.
That's what people thought.
He tells the truth.
And they just overlooked all of the other things that he was saying he would do. And so...
Yeah, we could keep ripping on Trump.
But anyway, back to, we were trying to say our history on this election, how we've changed.
Oh, yeah. Well, let's talk about the turning point, which was the night of the election.
The night of the election. So Aaron's texting me saying, I don't know what I'm going to do.
What do you mean?
You were freaking out.
What, if Trump
watching
wins,
the polls. You were like,
watching the polls.
Basically, it was like trying to talk somebody through the apocalypse as they watched it happen.
I remember we were video chatting
for hours.
From probably, let's say, 8 to 11 at night or something. We were just conversing.
Just conversing.
We weren't even talking much about the election.
I was just trying to...
Just trying to take our minds off it, basically.
Really?
And then every so often be like, check the polls, and be like, oh, Trump won Iowa. This is weird. Or whatever it was.
And then it was like, oh no, this is a different group of people. It's not super, it's fine.
It's not swing state. Anyway.
Yeah.
And then we eventually said goodnight, and we went off the video chat.
Yeah, when I said goodnight, I meant it, and I actually went to sleep.
No, I couldn't go to sleep. Not with the fate of my faith in humanity on the ledge.
Yes. So what were you expecting if you won? What was the outcome you thought was going to happen?
If Trump
in terms
won?
Of the environment, society, what, like...
I'm trying to put myself back in the mind of 17-year-old Aaron, his first exposure to politics.
Yes.
And he's watching a lot of The Young Turks, which is kind of a leftist YouTube political show, alternative news political show.
I just think America's the biggest power in the world.
Yeah, I think I was really worried about like America and North Korea.
Mm-hmm.
I think I was getting into all those like kind of fantasy, or not fantasy, but those dystopian imaginings, like thinking ahead, like, oh no, what if Trump, what if he and North Korea get into it? You know, he's erratic, you know, he's a crazy man. He's going to have his fingers, he's going to have the codes to nuclears and all that stuff. So I don't really know what I thought.
My biggest concern was the environment, because he was saying he's going to pull out of every single agreement, which he did. They shot down 54 different, like they abolished 54 different environmental rules and regulations during the last 4 years. But at the time I was like, everybody's going to just forget about the environment, and then we're going to be...
Well, everyone did forget about the environment during that election. And we were saying at the time, we were listening to the debates, and we were like, there's not one mention of the environment. This is disastrous. It should be taking precedent over this, but it wasn't mentioned until that one guy in the last debate like mentioned it with the crowd. He's like, what about the environment? And Hillary was like, well, yeah, we're going to continue supporting, you know, this. And she would have kind of kept it going along Obama's environmental quote unquote action, which wasn't really any action.
No, it wasn't. But at least in our minds at the time, it was like, there's no option. Like, if he gets in, the environment's screwed. Everyone's going to stop believing in climate change. It's going to be the end of the world. Yeah. So that was like pre-2016.
Well, it was 2017, 2016, yeah. Yeah.
And then, so, you don't wake up.
Anyway, I turned on the TV that night, November 9th, 11 p.m., Atlantic Standard Time, perhaps. Turn on TV, I go to CNN, of course, and I see Wolf Blitzer, Anderson Cooper, all those guys kind of standing around the map of the country, and it's looking very red, it's looking very Republican, and they're kind of really distraught. All the votes weren't in, but this is a point where Trump had practically won, like it wasn't officially sealed yet, but he'd won. And they were just... You could see the desperation on their faces and like the denial. They were like, well, no, Hillary could still win Florida or something. It's like, guys, it happened. It's over. Get over it. Yeah, it was a rough night. I think I didn't sleep because I was so upset or worried. Yeah. I think I went to school the next day. I just couldn't face it because I went to a pretty rural school and a few Trump fans there. I was like, I don't want to... I remember that for the couple of weeks after, one guy just kept yelling like, 2 terms, guys. He's going to be in there for 2 terms. Get over it. I was like, screw you, man.
Yeah.
But anyway, so that's up to the election. Since his inauguration, let's say.
Yeah. So there's probably like almost a year of still, this is a joke. But then eventually we started to try and we would say, okay, what's one good thing about this situation? And over the last 4 years, more recently in the last year, I think, we have seen a lot of people were kind of forced to act. If they had a really strong belief for the environment, for equality, people began taking matters into their own hands.
Well, yeah.
A little bit.
There's a lot of talk for like a women's march. You know, there was all that.
Yeah.
There was all those environmental marches and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. Young people especially get involved. So basically, guys, what we've been saying to ourselves is like, yeah, of course it's bad that Trump and his cabinet don't believe in climate change. Like, I mean, when we say it's bad, I mean it's terrible. But I think, hot take, he has done more for the environment in his 3 years in office than Hillary would have. Mm-hmm. And probably than Obama did.
Yeah. And it's not he did it, but he...
Indirectly through his extreme incompetence and disbelief, has inspired a whole generation of kids especially to be like, okay, then we'll do it. We'll take it into our own hands.
Yeah.
Like, do we think these climate marches, I'm asking you, Alicia, do you think these climate marches and all these things would have happened if Hillary had won? Because I genuinely don't think.
No. Like, they could have, but I don't think it'd be so...
Because now we have an opposition, or now they have an opposition.
They have somebody to rally and say, this is who we're taking down.
There's someone who, at the huge parades, they can have a huge float of, if you've seen that big Trump balloon.
And the reason we picked the United States to talk about is because every country in like the West,
sure,
what we're seeing has this party that's rising up, preaching hate,
I think it seems like there's a kind of Republican Party in every country.
Yeah. So we're not saying Trump alone, but he was kind of the first, the biggest. Yeah.
I think the US, like they're fun to laugh at, and everyone's been joking about them in politics, saying, wow, the US is such a mess. But I mean, it seems to me that other countries are going through very similar things, maybe not as extreme or as overt, most likely just not as publicized, because not all eyes are on them like they are in the US all the time. But for the last 5 years and for the next few as well, I think other countries are going to be going through the same kind of battle between similar parties to Democrats and Republicans.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say that because it's like, why are you talking about America when you're Canadian? This is why. And because it's kind of the center of...
Yeah, it's also just the one that we are more interested in.
Yeah, because Canadian politics are like, either party is... It'll do whatever.
Well, I mean, as much as people wouldn't like to admit it, the US is just kind of so influential. There's that quote, it's like when the US sneezes, everyone else gets a cold. And that's kind of how it is.
It really is.
And I think Trump and his brashness sums that up best.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
Where are we? Now we're in 2020.
Yeah, well, now we're in 2019.
Oh.
And we get into 2020. Some familiar faces around. Bernie, Trump, Elizabeth Warren, Joe Biden's back with a vengeance.
Yeah.
What are we thinking about this upcoming election?
So I was checking out the platforms of every candidate, or the candidates that are relevant in my opinion.
Sure.
I asked you today if somebody else could become the leader of the Republican Party.
Right.
Because I didn't really know. And it looks like no.
Well, I mean, they can. It's possible. It's legal.
They can.
They won't.
But didn't they already, the Republican, whatever those guys are?
They cancelled some of the primaries.
Okay. That seems undemocratic, in my humble opinion. But I feel like you can't just say no. I don't know, though. Because I was looking at this other guy's platform, Joe Walsh.
Joe Walsh, who's he? So he would be someone who is running against Trump.
Yeah, so there were 3 people that are technically running against him right now.
For the Republican nomination.
And the other 2 just seemed like their pictures were them just like walking in like, it was caught on like
so they're not big deals.
Not big deals. But this guy, it was a picture of him sitting down, pointing at the camera.
Ooh.
And his platform, he was just like, he is the worst of us. Like, he does not represent what this party stands for.
Yeah. Is he an older guy or a younger guy?
Like 57.
So that's pretty young for American politics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was like, I think he would have a chance because I think people would vote for him. The people that really don't like Trump, but they're Republicans and they have conservative economic beliefs.
Do you think there are a lot of those? That's the question.
Yeah, that's the question. Because I feel like in Canada that's the case. A lot of the conservatives that I know, they're conservative economics, conservative socialists. That's not the right word, but like socially conservative, sticking with tradition or whatever. And that's cool, but they're not anti-immigration. They're not this meanness that he embodies. And I think this guy could
just his personality.
Yeah.
I remember I sent you such a heartfelt text, probably the most like sentimental I've ever been, like a couple weeks after his election. I was like, you know what the real problem is? And it was just like this really sentimental thing about how, like, the biggest issue is that it's not even, and we've seen it since his election, it's not even the policies. It's not even the official stuff that his cabinet has done or he's enacted. It's the types of people that the government or the president, is like the figurehead. This is the one that kids study in class and they look up to, and they see all their news, and obviously adults do as well. And this is kind of who you're electing as the spokesperson for your country. And so in Trump's case, I think you're normalizing a lot of
really
very dangerous
things.
Rhetoric, a lot of racism, xenophobia, definitely, climate change denial. And the problem isn't that he's enacting policies on those, because it hasn't been that extreme.
No.
From what I can tell. It's that he's emboldening racist, or has emboldened racists, climate change denialists, anti-intellectualists, all this stuff. And that's the issue. It's kind of a weakening of like society's foundations, because he's brought what were formerly incredibly extreme views into the mainstream, seemingly just by force of will. And unfortunately kind of exposed that they were not that rare.
No, they're like brewing, and people.
Yeah.
But that's not. There can be a bunch of people that have these underlying just like hatreds, but society should just push them down, not make them feel.
Repress those people.
Repress them. Say you cannot express these views. Like.
So you're talking about free speech.
Yeah. Because you should, I feel
free
like...
Free speech shouldn't include hate speech.
It shouldn't include hate speech, and if something you're saying or something you are doing is going to hurt somebody else,
right,
it just doesn't make sense that should be allowed, or embodied in your president.
Yeah.
So I think this allowed these people to think, oh, if he can be saying all these gross things and be president, I can say them to my community or the people around me. I don't have to be kind anymore. They're probably not thinking I don't have to be kind. They're like, oh, I can speak my mind now.
Right.
And it's like, your mind is...
That's kind of what we were saying about how young people have been marching way more for equality in the environment since his election. Mm-hmm. The other side is that other extreme is motivated way more as well.
Anyway, so that's the Republican candidate, Joe Walsh.
Yeah.
And then I was looking at the other platforms.
The Democrats.
And we have Elizabeth Warren, Joe Biden, and Bernie Sanders.
Those are
the three big ones. The other ones, there's 13 of them in total.
13, yeah.
Yeah, so it's like, guys, why don't we all just support
Why don't we all
Bernie?
just get behind Bernie?
How about if we can let the three of them duke it out, but like the other 10 of you...
but get behind him. 78, 79, I don't know.
Anyway, so these three are the ones that, in my opinion, I was like, okay, these guys are the big players. They're the ones I knew their names, so on. So I'm just going to share a little bit about their platforms, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So Elizabeth, she seems to have a really large scope. From my first impression, I knew her name, and my guess would have been, oh, she's very similar to Hillary, just very centrist. But I went on her page, and she does have a lot of...
No, yeah, she's a lot like Bernie.
Yeah, she's a lot like Bernie. Maybe a little bit more easy to swallow.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, she probably packages it in a more reasonable way. Bernie's quite radical in his speech.
He is. He's like, we're going to change everything. But she's just... I feel like she could convince people this isn't crazy.
Yeah,
not that Bernie's are crazy. I bet he hasn't slept a single night in like 30 years just thinking about these things and planning them out and saying this is economically feasible.
Yep.
Anyway, so that's kind of her thing. She's very similar to Bernie. And I also wrote down all of their Green New Deal opinions.
Okay, cool.
So Warren is a co-sponsor.
Yeah.
Which is like the highest level of sponsor you could be. She really gets behind it. And she says if she gets into office, she'd be putting $3 trillion into climate change, like policy, institutions
Mitigation.
And things. Anyway, Biden, the people that are voting for him are people that are nostalgic for Obama, in my opinion.
For the days of Obama.
Yeah, all three of these guys, they want universal health care. It's kind of like their biggest platform. Besides Bernie. But these Warren and Biden, they both are like health care is like the biggest thing, which makes sense because, And concerning the Green New Deal, he supports it, and he's putting $5 trillion towards climate change mitigation. And he says 2030 cut emissions by 50%, 2050 net zero carbon. That's cool. More than I think I don't know what
Canada's plan? I don't know. Yeah, seems like it.
Anyway, but Biden says we can't say no to banning fracking. That's unrealistic. So that's what he's saying.
Yeah, it sounds to me like Biden's trying to toe this or trying to appeal to both sides of the Democrats. So both the kind of the working class, what the coal miners, the Rust Belt, and those people, but at the same time saying we're going to go full steam ahead with the environment. It's like, but we're going to be fracking.
We're going to be fracking.
Well, I mean, that's basically Obama.
Yeah, so that's Biden.
Yeah.
Then we got Bernie. He wants healthcare. He wants no more student debt. He wants increased social security.
He wants increased what? Increased seductive security.
I can't.
Someone's got a bit of a crush on Bernie.
Increased social security.
Right.
He is the co-sponsor of the Green New Deal. And he's pledging $16.3 trillion to the environment.
Wow.
You go, Bernie.
I mean, those numbers, I never really believe campaigns or candidates because they just say what they want to try and get elected. So I don't really believe much of that, but
I think I have a lot of faith in him. If he was to be elected, he wouldn't be able to achieve all these things, I don't think, in 4 years. But he would be able to start the conversation.
And, he seems quite sprightly for an older man.
He does, yeah.
He seems like he's quite healthy. I mean, Trump's 73 and he lives quite the unhealthy life.
Yeah, so I think Bernie would be fine.
So I don't know if age is a good question.
So anyway,
but that's definitely something people say about Warren. Like, well, Bernie's 70. How old is he? 79?
I think 79. He's almost 80.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So Warren has similar politics, but she's a little bit younger.
Yeah.
Wait, have you seen the clip of Bernie when he's like standing in a pickup truck at night giving a speech?
No, I haven't.
Oh, it's my favorite clip. He was like, it was when he was campaigning in 2016.
Mm-hmm.
And he's, they do crazy routes across the country, like they're always moving, doing speeches and all that stuff, town halls. And he just flew in or drove in somewhere really late at night. And they were late because of a delayed flight or something like that. But the crowd stayed at the place for him.
Oh my.
And he got there, or they were driving through or something, and he was like, oh, guys, we got to stop. I got to talk to these people. And he gets out, and he just looks like the smallest person standing on the back of this pickup truck, and he's like screaming to the masses.
Yeah, that's going to be the photo this week, is the picture of him when the bird flies in and lands on the...
Oh my
So he's giving a speech in this big arena or whatever, and a bird flies in and lands on his podium, and the crowd goes wild. It's so funny.
Bernie's such a people's champ. I love him.
I just wanted to talk about Bernie.
Yeah.
So that's the three, and it's like, out of these three, which one's going to make the biggest change, the biggest good for the people?
Right.
Obviously Bernie.
Well, let's talk about our predictions. So what do you think will happen? Just put your neck out there. It doesn't matter if you're wrong.
I don't know. Like, I feel like re-electing somebody, no matter how much hate they got, it just seems to always happen. In my lifetime, at least. I've never seen somebody for Trump.
Well, here's why I think he'll get I'm pretty confident that he'll become the nomination or the candidate. Mm-hmm. Because Republicans will say, like you were talking about mild conservatives who say, wow, he's too extreme for us. One, I don't think there are too many of those people. I think most conservatives will be like, oh good, finally someone's speaking for us. And the other thing, I think even people who are against him for the Republican side would be like, well, he's going to win us the election because he's very good at winning elections, so it seems. And he's had 4 years. He probably deserves 8. Like that's usually the thing that's why candidates usually get re-elected to their term, up to their term limits, because people usually say, well, what can they do in 4 years? 2 terms will be much more, much easier for them to actually enact their vision or whatever. Mm-hmm. So what do you think about on the Democrat side?
Well, looking at the polls, Biden's in the lead, which I don't understand, because it's like he's the least exciting out of these guys.
Right.
And he also has the most, for some reason, I don't know why this is in American elections, the person with the most sketchy background. I don't know too much about them, but I know Biden, it's like there's something going on there. Yeah. And it's like out of these three, he's
got a lot
the
of
most...
like Me Too allegations against him.
So it's like, why is he in the lead?
Yeah.
Why was Hillary in the lead? She was the sketchiest out of all of them. And it's like, I don't understand it, but...
They usually have the most money behind them, the most donors.
I know, but...
I think... I'm going to be optimistic. I'm going to say
Bernie gets it.
I hope Bernie will get it.
I think he's the only one that could beat
We both are in agreement about that. That Bernie's the only one probably who would beat Trump.
Yeah.
And that sounds really pessimistic, but it's just because I think
because of the current social situation, the biggest character, which is Bernie, like the biggest character has the biggest chance, I think.
Yeah, the loudest
he would get more coverage than Warren or Biden, I think.
Yep.
Because everybody would be like, oh my gosh, Bernie made it. Like, he's
exactly.
the 79-year-old man. They'd be so excited. But with Warren or Biden, there'd be no...
I mean, that's the thing. People always talk about, and you're asking why Hillary got in, it's because people didn't think Bernie would be electable. They're like, he's not going to be able to win a general election. So like, Hillary can win a general election. And then she couldn't. And I think the same way about Bernie. There's a lot of people voting for him in the primaries, so Democrats. Yeah. They'll be like, I'm voting for Biden. He might not represent me best, but he's most electable. And this is just, I think it would be a fatal mistake if Biden gets the election, gets the candidacy, gets the nomination. So. Because
I don't think he has the biggest chance.
You need to pick someone who people are excited for. Yeah. Their politics and their personality and their charisma. You can't just pick someone whose only talking point is, well, I guess he's better than Trump. Because Hillary tried that and it didn't work. And I think Biden would try something similar and it doesn't work. I think
so. He'd be like, we are good. We are the good side. Be on the right side of history. I feel like that'd be his thing. But it's like...
I mean, I guess people... No. He's an older white man.
Yeah.
I think people think that he'd be more...
Do you know who else is an older white man?
The oldest, whitest man, actually, is Bernie.
Oh, no.
But anyway, I think Biden, people would say the same things they say about Trump, like, oh, he speaks for the people, he speaks for the kind of disenfranchised people. But I think to those people, he doesn't speak to them more than Trump does. Like, I don't think he would snatch Trump voters.
No, I don't think so.
I don't think and so there's two types of ways Democrats can win. They either take voters away from Trump or they get people out who didn't vote.
Yeah.
I think Bernie would do that. I think Warren would do that. I don't think Biden would get people out who didn't vote.
Yeah. So, I wouldn't be upset if Warren got in.
No, of course.
Because
she's pretty exciting.
She's pretty cool. But I think Bernie has the biggest potential because he's saying we're going to abolish student debt.
Yeah.
Which, in my opinion...
You want to get the young people to vote.
Seems like there's a bit of a...
That's how you do it.
But also, I watched... What movie did I watch the other day?
The Big Short.
The Big Short. And I knew about the financial crisis, but this just brought it to the front of my mind, and I was like, the debt crisis in the States is the same.
The student loan crisis.
The student loan crisis. It's people are taking interest out on these loans. People are making money off of student debt. The students aren't going to repay it. Then why are you reloaning this? It's hard to get into how they do that, but there's a bubble, and it's going to pop because there's 300 million people in the States. About a third of them are students.
Wow.
There's going to be an issue, and people are just ignoring it. But I think this is how you get people to vote. I think Bernie would be like, guys, this is a big deal.
I like Bernie.
And all the students would come out and they'd vote. All of the people that don't have health care would come out.
I think he would capture the imaginations, and that's the main thing in elections.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be loud. You have to get media coverage, which Trump will do.
Mm-hmm.
Trump, will try to turn it into a dogfight with whoever it's against. He'll come up with, he'll hit rock bottom with a nickname or some allegation or some slur against whoever the Democratic candidate is. He would cast some kind of image on them and do his kind of playground stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I think Bernie could go toe to toe with him.
I think so.
I'm just picturing it on a debate stage.
Yeah, he's not going to just be laughing at him. He's going to be coming back.
I think he could be coming back with himself.
Clapping back.
And it's pretty easy to come back. I mean, Trump is a pretty easy target.
Yeah.
So I think it's doable. I mean, things do tend to just kind of slide off him because there's so much you can say bad about him.
Yeah. But I don't think the other candidates would have the guts to say anything. I think they would just laugh. They would just laugh. They'd be like, oh, you're such a joke.
Yeah, I mean, we've already seen Biden say some pretty questionable stuff in the heat of the moment.
Oh, no.
And I think he seems like he could let the pressure get to him a little bit. I don't think Bernie would.
No. Because Bernie has nothing to expose.
He's got nothing to lose, man.
He's got nothing to lose, but it's not like he's going to slip up and expose that he's actually...
This is his last ride.
There's something wrong with him. Oh, dear. But, the other two, I don't know too much about Warren, but Biden definitely. Based on the few times I've seen him speak, I'm like, ooh, buddy.
Yeah. So who do you think? What can you
I'm going to say Bernie.
You're going to say Bernie winning them both? I hope so. We have to be optimistic on this show.
We do. Do you know, I would genuinely cry happy tears if Bernie got elected.
I think I would cry happy tears as well.
That'd be so exciting. And I think that would change the entire world.
That would change the whole narrative, man. It'd be like, it can happen.
Yeah.
The good guy can do it.
Yeah. Which is what every movie says, but for some reason it just doesn't happen in real life.
We've got to switch. We've got to change the topic.
What's the other topics? Come on. Let me know. Because I'm going to just talk about this all night.
Okay. So we're talking about the environment in politics.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, right. I wanted to mention this. Around the same time as Trump's election, I remember we had this little thought experiment. 17-year-old politically inclined us were asking ourselves, what would be better, just as a experiment, a hypothesis? Which would be a better party to get elected? A fascist Green Party?
Mm-hmm.
That's the kind of thoughts we had. A fascist Green Party, so super environmentally progressive, but socially terrible.
Okay.
Dangerous even.
Ooh.
Or a really, really socially progressive party. So I'd say, all about equality, so basically Bernie.
Mm-hmm.
But they're climate change deniers.
I think the second one.
The really kind group that were climate change deniers?
Yeah.
Why do you think that?
Because I don't think it's going to be the government that makes change.
That's true.
And
but it can be.
It can be, that's
We've
true.
seen that in other countries, like, we're talking about a fascist Green Party. In China, they don't have a fascist Green Party, but they have a pretty totalitarian environmental-leaning party. And because they're such a dictatorship and they've got such a social hierarchy and a power structure, what the government says is law, and the government says, let's put up a new wind turbine every 8 minutes or whatever they do in China. It's something crazy. And they do that. And that's how those kind of countries can move really fast and can change really fast because they have no democracy.
That's really... I don't know if I could answer that question.
Do you remember what you said in 2017?
I probably said a fascist Green Party. Did I?
You said, if it was 4 years, then we want the socially progressive climate change deniers.
Yeah.
If it was 8 years, then we want the fascist Green Party.
Is that what I said?
That's what you said.
I don't think I could say that.
You're like, because in 8 years they could do a lot. I was like, yeah, but they could also do a lot of bad stuff.
Yeah, they could. But, I don't know. Because it's like, I would probably switch that. Well...
Flip it?
I don't know. I just think there needs to be a few years of incredibly drastic environmental change.
Yeah.
But there's no need for environmental change to have to come at the expense of social
No, I know. It's just a thought experiment.
Yeah. But
and in reality, there aren't too many fascist green parties. Oh, yeah, this is what we want to talk about.
Yeah, bring us.
Because right-wing politics
yes.
isn't usually a huge fan of the environment.
No.
In fact, they often don't believe in it.
And left-wing politics do believe in the environment
and we were wondering,
and people.
We're thinking, I don't think this should be the case. There's a lot of talk about identity politics.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, people voting a certain way, often in America, I'm a Democrat. I'm a lifelong Democrat. I'll always vote Democrat or with a Republican or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And what that means is that, and it's the same case in other countries from what I can see, liberals and conservatives here. Maybe not so with younger people. I don't think younger people have that kind of loyalty.
I don't think so.
But especially with a lot of older people or maybe adults, you can usually judge one person's entire political view by one of their political views. So for instance, if someone tells you, oh, I'm really pro-life.
Yes. Then you're going to say, okay.
What do they think about the environment?
Probably not really into it. It's not at the front of their mind. They don't really care. They might not even believe in climate change.
Yeah. And that, they probably are fans of keeping borders strong and all those kind of, security and law enforcement and that kind of thing, and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was in my teens, I was always thinking like, this is just people going on with the herd. This is just groupthink. This is just them, maybe they have some of these views, but mostly they are fitting themselves into a comfortable voting position. Yeah. But then I was looking into it, and there are psychological traits that will determine often, if genetic traits kind of, if people will be where they will be on the political spectrum. It's not exact. This kind of ties it back to the quote I started with, because I guess a good test would be like the Jungian big five traits. So you have openness, conscientiousness, etc., etc., etc. There's 5 of these traits which Carl Jung invented in his kind of psychology tests, which kind of determine a person's personality.
Yes.
And there's a lot of research in that these are really good indicators of where someone is politically. So for instance, people on the right or conservatives, they tend to be they value industry, not like industries, but working hard.
Yes.
The values of hard work, order, security, those kind of things. They tend to be low in like creativity and openness. Yeah. Whereas, people on the left will be the opposite of that. So so there are like psychological...
There are personality types.
There are personality types. They're not exact. So, there are a lot of centrists and there are a lot of people who have left and right views and all those things. Yeah. We're some of them. I don't think we're perfect leftists, even though we probably are pretty strong. Yeah. But bringing this back to the environment, the reason I wanted to mention it is because I had this thought that, in politics, there's kind of the left and right axis, which we've mentioned. So the left being liberal and the right being conservative, and we know those kind of traits. And then there's also, so let's call that the x-axis, going across the horizontal axis. And then there's also a vertical axis, which people reference, which is like how authoritarian you want you think the government should be, or how anarchic or libertarian?
Yeah, libertarian.
You think that, so basically how strong you think the government should be?
Yeah.
And then people typically place the environment just as an issue on the left, maybe with equality.
Yeah.
And those kind of things. But I've been thinking of it more as a third axis in itself. So now we have the vertical and the horizontal axis, the environmental discussion being like a z-axis going through them, or z, depending on where you are.
Mm-hmm.
So a third axis going through them, and on one side you have straight up climate change denier, and on the far extreme you have tree hugging, quote unquote, very crunchy, green environmentalist, kind of like us. And placing it as its own axis, as opposed to just as an issue on the left-right gradient, I think it opens up a lot more opportunities, a lot more possibilities for the environmental movement, because what this means is that someone who's as far as you can get on the right, so they're really, let's say they're really intolerant, let's say they're just really racist or sexist or something like that, and they're also really far up on the right, on the top, so they're like, and I think the government should be really, really strong, I think we should all be regimented, I think we should all wear uniforms or something crazy like that.
They could also love trees.
They could also
love
nature.
Trees.
Like those guys could be on the environment.
Because like I feel like a passion for nature is just, it's not a trait, it's a hobby in a way.
It's its own
like
thing.
It's its own thing. And like I understand that like low tolerance that contributes to environmental degradation.
I mean, if someone's, we're talking about those conservative traits, if someone's really low in openness and all these things, I mean, there is probably a likelihood that they won't be super compassionate about the environment. Yeah. But they can be. Yeah, because
but
no
make
one's
it seem like
perfectly
they
conservative
can't.
or perfectly
No
liberal.
one is this guy that's super.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so it's.
So I think envisioning it as a third axis in itself. So you have left, right, authoritarian, libertarian, and then climate change denial, environmentalist, and those can be your three axes, three axes. And doing this, it opens up a lot more opportunities, and I think it can bring more people to the environmentalist cause, because when we talk about the environmentalist cause, we're talking about how you can judge one person's politics usually by one of their politics or one of their views. There's a very specific type of person who's usually at the climate change protests. Yeah. There is, right? Yeah. And I think thinking of it as a z-axis or as a z-axis could definitely bring some other voices into the wind turbine discussion. Yeah, because some people might even feel, I'm not really left-leaning, so I can't. That's exactly it. Care about the environment. I think there are people like that. Or even just like, I don't like going to these marches, or I can't, so I can't be a part of this. Yeah. And it's like, this is one cause and nobody should feel excluded from. If you have even an ounce of care, you need to join up and not feel excluded from the movement. And that's also why this is kind of separate from that, but I think it's related. And we talk about like the extreme polarization in the US. Yeah. So you can't be in between. You can't be a centrist. Two parties. Like by definition, you literally can't be in between. Come voting time, like you have to vote for, or you don't vote. But those people are their own separate. That's another conversation. What was I saying? Oh yeah, with the polarization, part of that is definitely social situations of the last few years. So things have, as we were saying at the start, things have gotten more extreme. News has gotten more extreme. Everything's kind of gone up a few notches. Yeah. Everything's happening faster. It's happening wilder. It's happening crazier. Like think about all the things Trump said in his campaign that in previous years would have completely ruined his electability. Like there would have been no chance. There were at least 5 occasions where he said things which 20 years ago, if in a US election someone had said that, they would have been cancelled per se, as you say. But he rode through it because people's attention spans are shorter now. Yeah, they forget about it. And he normalized it. Yeah. What was I saying? Oh yeah, the polarization. And a lot of people blame it on things like Russian trolls on Facebook. You know, those kind of echo chambers and the segregation that we find ourselves in online, where it's easy for me, a leftist, to only engage with leftists. And it's easy for the right to do that, or whoever. And as such, the only interaction is usually hostile. Yep. And there's not a lot of conversation between them. But I think, obviously there needs to be a little bit more cooperation. There needs to be less denigration of the other side. 100%. Oh yeah, this is the environment, me bringing it back. When you let's talk about Hillary. So an example is Hillary calling all Trump supporters degenerates. It's like, that's not going to get people to vote for you. That's not going to turn people to your side. And I think the left does that a lot, talking about people on the right. Let's say talking about climate change deniers. It's often spoken about with a lot of, like we're looking down on them, or you're mocking, let's say with mockery, or disdain or something like that. It's like, that's not how you convince people about climate. That's not how you get people to your side. People need to understand, I think, and I think because politics, or what we hear about it, or let's say political news and media is so dominated by young people on Twitter, and this is kind of their first, they're maybe not very experienced when it comes to politics and things. They don't understand that there is two sides to this, or there are a few sides to this. There's always been liberalism and there's always been conservatism, and it's always been a kind of push and pull, tug of war, moving society back and forth, but eventually reaching some kind of equilibrium. Although the equilibrium is always changing, both sides need to be there, and not just...
But the environment doesn't have to be on one side.
Yeah.
And it hasn't always been. It's pretty recent that it became a very...
Politicized,
yes.
Well, there was a lot of money that went into that, to making it politicized.
Literally, yeah.
Yeah.
So that was in the 70s, right? Exxon did all this research, and they were like, oh, the climate's warming, sea levels are rising, carbon in the water's rising, and then they put all the money in to cover it up because they're like, oh, this is going to ruin our business.
Yeah, there's so much fossil fuel lobbying in the US, which has done a lot of work for the last 20 years, the last 30, 40 years to kind of discredit environmentalists and research, and to try and all they need is to sow the seed of ambiguity and of doubt and of contention, and they've successfully done that, obviously, with the rise of climate change denial. And as we said, when the US gets a cold, or what's the quote? It's like when the US sneezes, everyone gets a cold, so that's kind of filtered down, I think, to every other country.
Yeah.
I'm sure they have their own lobbying and their own climate change tactics and all those kind of things.
Yeah, so I just think it shouldn't be a politicized issue.
Right.
It needs to go back to just everybody caring about it.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't that long ago, but in our minds, when things are like 30 years old, it seems like 100 or 200 years ago. It's like, oh, this president, it was a Republican president that put solar panels on the roof of the White House, I think.
Yeah,
maybe it wasn't, but it was like whoever enacted I think I said this in another episode, whoever made the Environmental Protection Agency, he was definitely a Republican. Because he was like, oh, this is a massive issue. But then 2 more presidencies later, another Republican got in after a Democrat, and they were like, okay, this all got to go, because pretty much all just big money in politics.
Bush. I think it was Bush.
Yeah.
He was initially for climate change, but he...
and just something happened.
I think around 9/11, it was like, we've got to flip this switch. That probably about covers it, episode Trump.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm sure there'll be future discussions on this.
Yeah, we're going to keep talking about politics.
Especially around
as the election kind of comes to a boil.
Yeah, so that's it on episode Trump. We hope everybody has a wonderful day whenever you're listening to this. This week we'll probably be posting a few times on Instagram @the_environmental.
Yep, check out the page for inspiration, naturey things, and general reminders to get off Instagram.
Yes. Cool. So thanks for listening, guys. Have a nice
day.